To start out this morning, it's my pleasure to introduce you to Taylor Hladik, Senior Trade Commissioner at the High Commission of Canada in the United Kingdom and based in London. Taylor will be speaking to us this morning regarding Canada-UK commercial relations post-Brexit, the new era of global Britain. Taylor possesses a Bachelor of Commerce from the University of Saskatchewan and a Master of Arts in International Affairs from the Norman Paterson School of International Affairs at Carleton University. Taylor began his assignment at the High Commission of Canada in the UK in August 2017. Prior to his arrival in London, Taylor was the commercial counselor in Paris from 2013 to July 2017, where he managed the innovation program as well as key sectors, which included agriculture, energy, and life sciences. In Taylor's presentation, he tells us that the Canada-UK trade relationship is poised to grow and get even stronger as both countries begin negotiations for an enhanced trade deal in the next year. In 2020, the UK was Canada's third largest destination for merchandise exports worldwide and a key source of foreign direct investment and science and technology partnerships. Two-way merchandise trade with the UK amounted to $27.7 billion, making the United Kingdom Canada's fourth largest trading partner after the US, China, and Mexico. The UK is Canada's second largest services trading partner in the world after the US. Major Atlantic Canada sectors exporting to the UK include machinery, agriculture, seafood, transportation equipment, chemical products, forestry products, textiles and consumer products, and metals and minerals. On the heels of Brexit, there are new opportunities in the UK in trade incentives and market relationships change. The Trade Commissioner Service can help navigate the challenges with entry into UK market sectors and provide ongoing assistance with problem solving, in-market support, funding, and business support. So without any further ado, I'd like to say thank you to Taylor for joining us today, and I'm going to pass it over to you for the presentation.
That's great. Thank you very much for that very kind introduction. Again, my name is Taylor Hladik, and I'm one of the Senior Trade Commissioners located here in London, England at the Canadian High Commission. Our job here is to help support Canadian companies who are looking to do business in the United Kingdom. And today, I'm going to go through a bit of a presentation and go through a few things I think will be very useful for you. First of all, I'm going to talk about how the UK and Canada collaborate together and the important historical linkages that we have. Next, I'm going to talk a little bit about our trade in goods and services and provide you a high-level picture of what that actually means. Then I'll talk a little bit about the Atlantic Canada trade, because we have some stats for that as well. Provide a bit of a short overview on what our priority sectors are, then talk a little bit about Brexit. It's hard to talk about the UK still without talking about Brexit and what those implications are for Canada. And then from there, I'll talk a little bit about the challenges and opportunities, as well as, and after that, which I think will be one of the most critical part, in particular for those of you who haven't worked with the Canadian Trade Commissioner Service in the past, exactly what it is that we can do to help you. So as a bit of an overview from the UK, of course, is a very important market for Canada. We have had a long historical relationship with the UK, and one that has been mutually advantageous for both of our countries. The UK has and will continue to be a very important global player. It's a very large economy. It has a number of Fortune 500 companies here. And because of that, it is a market and a destination on its own. It has drawn a lot of Canadian companies, a lot of Canadian interest, and it's, in addition to that, it's also provided a bit of a launching pad for those companies from Canada who are looking to do business in Europe and in the EU. And I don't see that changing even with their departure from the EU. We also know that the UK is an important financial center, and this we don't see changing in the foreseeable future either. Now, the next sort of slides, I'm going to sort of go through some of the big picture numbers as far as what the trade is between Canada and the UK. I would like to just emphasize one thing before I go on the slides, because sometimes the big numbers don't mean very much. But I'd like to sort of show here is that when we looked at the bilateral trade with the EU before the UK's departure, roughly 25% of that bilateral trade with the EU was actually with the UK. So that provides insight as to just how important of a market it actually is. Now, this first slide, it shows what our Canadian good exports are to the UK. Now, the one thing I like to know, of course, is it looks like we have almost $20 billion worth of trade, which is true, but a lot of that actually is in gold. Now, the gold is liquid. It's about transfer of ownership versus actual transfer of actual material. But it is something important to note that 75%, a little over 75% of our actual bilateral export or exports to the UK is actually tied up with gold. But let's remove gold from that, and then we can take a closer look at what that actually means. So Our trade with the UK and exports focuses mostly around minerals and metals, machinery, agriculture, transportation equipment. So these are the things that we export to the UK on a large basis. There are other things as well, like chemicals, forestry products, but those are the large sort of exports that we currently have. Now we look at what we import from the UK. There's a lot of similarities, or there's a lot of linkages between Canada and the UK when it comes to that sector. So of course, we import still a lot of minerals and metals from them, machinery products, transportation equipment, agriculture, agri-food is a little bit less. So there's a lot of complementarity between our economies as we see products move back and forth. Now, the next few slides are probably a little bit less interesting because when we talk about services, services are not always well defined in how stats pull them out. So we have travel services, transportation and government services, and commercial services. That doesn't really provide a very big picture as to what sectoral opportunities there are within services. Now, we do know that the UK is a very important market for services. They produce and sell a lot of services around the world, and because of that, the UK is looking to see how they can strengthen their service exports, but more importantly than that, is how do you incorporate services into free trade agreements, which often isn't the case currently. So that's something as well to keep an eye out. But again, I'm just providing this as a sort of a big broad picture and also provide you with the numbers for the UK exports or imports into Canada, which is roughly balanced. We had about 7.3 million of exports to the UK. We have about 7.8 million imports from the UK into Canada. So it's relatively balanced. But again, these sort of pie charts don't provide that much sort of detail. So now when we go and take a look at the actual Atlantic Canada trade with the UK, the numbers actually break down fairly similar. And just to note here that this is in alphabetical order, but our major exports from the Atlantic Canada into the UK are roughly the same as what we have nationally. Minerals and metals, that doesn't include gold, machinery, agriculture, agri-food, transportation equipment, forestry products. That's sort of the breakdown of where they are. And again, complementary on the way back, fairly similar to what we're seeing from national scale as well in Canada. Now I talked a little bit about what our priority sectors are. When I talk about priority sectors for our office here in London, it's the ones where we focus in on. So we do, of course, support other sectors, but these are the sectors that we feel are a priority for Canadian companies looking to do business here. So this is the list here. I'm not going to go through them in detail. We have about 26 people here in the office, and these are the sectors where we have someone dedicated to understanding what's happening here in the UK, making sure that they build up the proper networks to help support your companies when they come here to the UK, looking to better understand the market. And I'll talk a little bit more about the services that we provide at a later date, but maybe just touch ever so briefly on a couple of sectors to give you a sense as to sort of what we're doing. When we look at aerospace and space, the UK is currently looking at expanding its presence in the space sector. They're doing this because as they're leaving the EU, or seeing as they've left the EU, they've also left the European Space Agency. So how are they going to continue this all-important market? So there's, now it's June, there's currently one of the first ever space conferences here in the UK, and we have an officer who's focused in on how are those opportunities going to evolve, what commitments are the UK government going to make, and where are potential opportunities for Canadian companies to plug into that. When we look at agriculture and agri-food, for example, during the whole Brexit process, we have an officer dedicated to that, which also includes fish. She followed very closely about how the potential tariff changes would impact upon Canadian seafood exports into the UK, and provided advice to a number of the seafood companies as to what those implications were, helping them prepare for what may or may not happen as a result of Brexit. And I'll talk about that a little bit later on. Also briefly on life sciences, it's been a very busy year for our life sciences officer, focused on how do we help the Canadian companies looking to tap into the UK market as they look for PPE, as they're looking for collaboration on vaccines. And even, it was interesting this year because we actually had a couple of the hospitals that we put in touch, Canadian hospitals put in touch with UK hospitals, as far as understanding how the vaccine rollout worked and what lessons learned here in the UK could be applied to Canada. And finally, I'll just touch on energy and clean technology, especially clean technology. With the UK hosting COP26 this year, there's more of a focus here in the UK on what that will mean as far as investments to greening the economy here, but also what events will happen around COP that might be of interest for Canadian companies. So again, here's where one of our, actually two members of our team are dedicated to looking at how that will evolve and how we can support Canadian companies in that area. I'd like to just, before we move on to STIs, just again flag, if you're not one of those sectors that are not listed, we still provide support to you. It's just we don't have someone who's focused on that sector day in and out, but we do work on all sectors from a responsive basis. So now I'm going to talk about a little bit about STI. It may not be of interest for everyone here, but I think it's actually very important to note because it also shows the broader collaboration between Canada and the UK. So as the UK was moving away from the EU, there was a recognition that they used to be inside the EU and therefore inside the collaboration on innovation. Now that they're on the outside, and when they voted to leave the EU, they had started to look for opportunities to collaborate and build a stronger relationship with other countries such as Canada. Now, we saw earlier on that there's a great deal of complementarity between Canada and the UK around things such as innovation. And there's a number of opportunities that we could work with them both on a bilateral basis and also on a multilateral basis. So as the UK started their slow process of leaving the EU, Canada and the UK had decided to sign an STI MOU. And this was signed back in 2017 between Prime Minister May and Prime Minister Trudeau. Prime Minister May was the Prime Minister at that point in time. Now, I've been involved with a fair number of MOUs over the years. Often these are signed to sort of try to generate interest and try to create momentum forward. This is one of the first MOUs I've ever seen signed that actually was it's been so successful. There's been so much movement. You've seen delegations going from the UK to Canada, Canada to the UK, all about trying to build up that collaboration and those opportunities. The priority sectors have been agri-tech, advanced manufacturing, clean tech, quantum tech, AI, and polar science. And we've seen delegations going back and forth. There's been spillover, there's been a space delegation. And all this has been about trying to create and facilitate a networking between Canadian organizations who are interested in innovation, as well as UK organizations, and form those synergies. And at the end of the 3 years since the MOU was signed, about $100 million additional dollars have been invested into joint collaboration between Canada and UK companies and organizations on innovation. It has been very successful. And it's been successful to the point where there's actually been a need to revisit the MOU from the perspective of trying to focus it in a little bit more. A lot of the efforts today have been top up, and now the idea is how do we focus on some areas that are key for UK Canadian priorities, addressing industrial change, societal impacts, and what are the global challenges that we should be focusing on around innovation. So there will likely be a renewal of that MOU, and things to look that will likely be incorporated, things around health, achieving net zero, and emerging digital technologies. The other area that I'll touch on ever so briefly is foreign direct investment. I know this is more about working with the regional development agencies, but I think, again, it's useful to simply quickly highlight that there is a great deal of investment coming from the UK, and there is opportunities for collaboration in that regard. So there's about 950 UK affiliates located in Canada, and they employ about 140,000 Canadians, and it has a great deal of benefit for Canada, both from a revenue point of view, but also from a sharing of information and a collaboration and building that all-important network to help Canadian and UK companies work and collaborate together. We've seen a lot of the top sectors are in wholesale trade, finance and insurance, professional and scientific and technical services, and it's all focused on the benefits of being in Canada, the proximity to the US, and in addition, Canada has a number of free trade agreements around the world that helps sort of those UK firms located here to benefit from that area. Now, ever so briefly, again, just from a slide perspective, about 25% of investment into Canada comes from Europe, and of that, 8% actually comes from the United Kingdom. So it is one of our top investors into Canada. Now, I also want to highlight a new program that we'll have here in London, because that might be of interest for a few people. The CTA, or Canadian Technology Accelerator program, was developed about 12 years ago. London had one for about 3 years. It was put on hold for a brief period of time leading up to Brexit, but now that's behind us. We are going to be relaunching that come December of this year. This program is really about working with Canadian companies who are looking at launching in a new market, ones that have a scalable product, have had some success in one market, but recognize that maybe their product needs to be slightly tweaked or modified or sort of revisited about how it's going to enter into market. If a company comes for this program, we lean in. We get to know the company a little bit better. We can actually provide some support as far as broader recommendations on who to meet with, how to help them. And so this is something to look out for. Now, when we look at this program, it is likely going to be focused in the early term on life sciences or clean tech. Life sciences because of what's happening in regards to COVID, but also potentially clean tech because of the UK's hosting of COP26. So that, if you're interested in this program, we of course can share more information with you, but that's something to watch for in the coming months here in London. Now, of course, one needs to talk about Brexit. It's very hard to have a presentation about the UK without making some sort of reference and having some sort of conversation around Brexit. So to provide a bit of a snapshot, I'm not going to go that deep. I have a whole like half an hour to hour presentation on Brexit alone. I'm just going to provide a few key things to think of in regards to the UK's departure from the EU. First of all, it happened very recently. It happened only about 4 months ago. And up until December 24th, when there was actually a continuity agreement signed between, or agreed to between the UK and the EU, there was uncertainty as to whether actually a deal would come about or not. So for a lot of the UK firms and the EU firms, and quite frankly, to a certain extent, Canadian firms, there was uncertainty as to what December 31st would bring. What were the implications of either a no deal scenario or a deal scenario? Now, the good news was that on December 24th, which actually kind of ruined my Christmas Eve, there was a deal that was struck, and this came into place on December 31st. At 11 p.m. here. Now, again, just because that was signed, and there's still, of course, the holidays, and even then advice to UK firms was still coming out as late as December 29th on how to prepare and what this would actually mean for companies. So this created a lot of uncertainty here in the market. That is not still fully away yet, because there's certain dates that keep evolving as to sort of when additional requirements are going to check in. What type of a diversion will they have on certainly policy regulations? And I'll talk a little bit about that later on. Now, when we look at the UK, as they've departed from the EU, they're looking at how do they be global Britain? How do they take a different perspective in the world and expand their trade footprint? How do they look at engaging with other like-minded partners like Canada? And in that regard, we're very, very excited because, you know, although they were a very strong partner within the EU, now that they're out, there's certain a stronger voice in certain political forums. So, you know, they're a strong champion for free and fair trade and to reinvigorate the WTO, which is very much aligned with what Canada would like to have. They're looking at negotiating a number of bilateral and regional agreements and being part of one such as what Canada has with CPTPP in Asia. And in addition to that, they're also looking at how do they actually look to promote their exports and support businesses across the UK. And therefore, there's a number of opportunities for Canadian companies to potentially get involved with their investments into the local economy. So things to look at, and I'll touch on that a little bit later as well, is there are a number of challenges that came about for UK firms and EU firms as the UK left. Not only was there uncertainty, but also, you know, they've left the single market, and therefore there's now a customs and borders check, and that has created friction. Now, this is something I like to emphasize because it's not necessarily apparent. Before the UK left the EU, the UK SMEs who were exporting into the EU were not actually truly exporting. Because, of course, they never had to deal with customs checks, customs forms, or all these things, because their products and the EU products were all sort of underneath the same policy and regulations, and they're all in the single market. Thus, now that they're outside of the EU, there is friction at the border. They need to worry about what forms they fill out. Many of them have never had to fill out forms, and there's a slowdown at the border as customs authorities need to check through the goods, etc. That friction, of course, costs money. We've been doing this for many, many years with the US and with other markets around the world. So for Canadian companies to cross the border, we're very adept and used to that. That gives us a bit of an advantage here as the UK companies look to adjust to this new reality. So when we look at where we are as far as Canada is concerned, we have the continuity agreement, and that is very good because it provides stability for Canada for the foreseeable future. And this is an agreement that basically replicates what we have with CETA, again, to provide that continuity. And it also establishes within that agreement a decision to move forward on a bespoke agreement. The CETA agreement, although it's very good for the EU, there's certain areas that we feel we can go further with a single bilateral discussion with the UK. So in order to move that direction, we had launched, the Government of Canada had launched in March, a process to consult with Canadians to figure out what people had to say, how they felt a bilateral agreement would benefit them, and what they'd like to see in that agreement. Now, that consultation concluded on April 27th, and we certainly look forward to seeing what Canadians had to say and what type of direction the future negotiations will undertake. This also referenced the UK's desire to join the CPTPP, and again, this is all part of strengthening our bilateral relationship with the UK. Now, I should also flag that there is no end date to the current trade continuity agreement, to the Canada-UK trade continuity agreement, but there is a commitment within that to have negotiations start within 1 year, which again, we're aiming to hopefully have that start in the autumn of this year, but also the fact that we will conclude a proper bespoke agreement with the UK within 3 years. So that's roughly 3 years from now, and that's something to look forward to, because we will look to move further than what we did with the trade continuity agreement. As I mentioned before, the UK is interested in possibly incorporating services more into a trade agreement, and there's other areas where we can maybe look at labor mobility and things like that. So we'll have to see how that evolves, but there's reasons to be quite optimistic in that regard. Now, I'd also like to then talk a little bit about the challenges and opportunities for Canadian firms as a result of Brexit, and to a certain extent as a result of COVID. So a few of the big challenges that we've seen since December 31st is a few of the rules have changed and come about, or they're about to change. So one thing that we've really noticed, and we have a lot of questions on, is the value-added tax. For the day-to-day large corporate sales, the value-added tax doesn't really change. For the smaller companies who are direct-to-consumer shippers, so not using an Amazon or Spotify, that's where the big change is. So now if you're a manufacturer that produces something that sells directly to a consumer here in the UK that would send it by mail or by courier, it is now your responsibility to collect VAT and to pay the VAT to the UK government, which means you have to register for UK VAT or to collect it, and then you have to pay it. For many companies, we've seen that this is just, it doesn't make it economically viable to do that. So we've seen a few companies opt not to ship directly to consumers anymore. Also, when we look at customs forms, again, this is where I referenced the challenges some of the UK firms had. Canadians have been relatively adept at that. But for some firms, initially, there were some challenges as to how to properly fill out the form, because the forms had some changes as far as how you'd make sure you got zero tariffs and things of that nature. Regulations is something else that I need to make reference to here. And here's where we're looking forward and the challenges that we're facing on a longer term basis on regulations. When the UK left the EU, they brought over all the EU rules with them. It was, of course, unrealistic for them to create a whole new swath of rules all in one go. So they basically adopted all the EU rules in one go. We do know that they need to and want to change certain rules and requirements, and we'll have to see how that changes over time. We've seen, for example, an interest in a dialogue here about possibly looking at changing how fur is exported into the UK. There's also been discussions around the CE mark, that will no longer apply here in the UK. You'll have to then apply for a UK CE mark. These are all changes that we see coming up. And then the regulatory changes for things. This is one area where our office will be keeping a very close eye on over the coming few years, because we don't anticipate all the changes happening all at once, because the UK is very busy as they adjust, but we are looking and anticipating changes to happen, and we're going to be following that, and we'll of course share that out with companies as they come about. The other thing that we've seen some challenges on is rules of origin. This also creates some potential opportunities for companies as well, and I'll talk about that a little bit more when on the opportunity side. This is where, when we used to ship a product over to the UK to go into the supply chain and then it moved on into the EU, there was no problem. It was all viewed as having entered the EU already, and therefore there was accumulation, it wasn't a problem. Now, however, the EU never agreed to allow accumulation with the UK. Therefore, if we ship a product over, goes into supply chain, and then moves on into the EU, depends on what the percentage of that product is, it could risk facing a tariff on the UK company. I'll give you one quick example that we've already run into a challenge with, is with Canadian wheat. Canadians, of course, we make very high quality wheat with protein in it, and this is what the UK bakers like to use to produce their loaves of bread. What's happened though is that the percentage of Canadian wheat going into producing a loaf of bread raises percentage is just high enough that it doesn't meet the threshold anymore to be a UK product when it leaves the UK. Now, although we could ship grain directly to Ireland without facing any tariffs, because it's come into the UK and it gets modified and then shipped into Ireland, the UK companies, the millers and the bakers, are now facing a tariff. So it's their responsibility, of course, to look at how they're going to modify, either change the recipe mix for how they produce their bread, charge the Irish consumers a bit more money, or potentially relocate some of their production over to Ireland. All that to say is that, of course, the grain is high enough quality that they'll continue to use it. But that's just a bit of an example of how this rules of origin does impact upon supply chains. And that's something else that you need to actually think through. So when I talk again about opportunities, and I'm going to come back to the rules of origin in a minute, because that's a very interesting element. We have the stability of the Canada-UK trade continuity agreement. The whole thing of rules of origin, the friction at the border that I had spoken about earlier, these are all things that are sort of increasing costs or challenges for UK and EU firms who used to do trade together. There are opportunities that are being generated within that sphere where gaps are being created. And there was a survey that was done just prior to the actual departure of the UK from the EU. And it showed that roughly 8% of UK firms, SMEs in particular, who are currently doing business in the EU were no longer going to continue. They had done their analysis, they determined that it was no longer economically viable because of the friction at the border. Now, that's just UK companies moving into the EU. There are probably an equal number of EU firms that were exporting into the UK that are looking at it very similarly as well. So again, as they're no longer in the market, could there be potential opportunities for Canadians? Are there supply chains that companies can tap into? I know, speaking to one of the associations here, they were seeing a number of supply chain contracts expiring, and the EU companies making decisions to go with EU firms simply because they didn't want the uncertainty or the friction at the border of dealing with a UK firm anymore, because it was no longer cost effective to do it that way. So again, this sort of change and evolution will create opportunities. Another reason why we need to continue to follow the regulations to see how those might change. And the more divergence between the UK and the EU, the more there might be potential opportunities for us in the EU. But at the same time, it's something that we have to keep an eye on as far as some challenges maintaining our market share here in the UK. Finally, the UK is looking at continuing to invest and to support the companies here in the UK as they adjust to the new reality. And on top of that, because of COVID and because of Brexit, they're looking at investing into infrastructure as a way of helping the economy to grow. There's also a lack of skilled labor now in the UK. They used to be able to have EU citizens come in and work without a visa, but now that they're out of the EU, there's a visa that's required. It's not quite as fluid as it was before, so there has been some challenges around labor shortages, including in agriculture, banking, other areas as well, nursing, and innovation. Coming back to the STI MOU that I spoke about a little while ago. So as you can see, there's certain challenges and opportunities, and I come back to the priority sectors and our offices I spoke about earlier, suggest that you reach out and we can talk to you a little bit more about what the nuanced opportunities are in your particular individual sector. And this actually comes up to my last sort of few slides, where I'm going to talk a little bit about the services that we provide as the Canadian Trade Commissioner Service and how you can reach in and get some support from us. So for those of you who have not worked with us in the past, we do sort of, broadly speaking, sort of three key things. Our job here in the market is to network. We have boots on the ground. We go to events. We reach out to UK firms. We create partnerships with associations. We get to know exactly what's happening here in the UK. Who are some of the key players, and who do we need to turn to get information as to how things are changing and what opportunities are coming about? We also have, which is mostly driven out of Ottawa, we have funding. So there's some CAN export funding to help SMEs who are looking to start into a new market, associations who are looking to help their members enter a new market or continue to strengthen somewhere. There's also for companies who are looking on the innovation side of how they form some innovative partnerships. And then there's also, which is more domestically focused on community investments. And then there's also the Canadian International Innovation Program. So these are also funding programs that are very supportive and helpful for Canadian firms. And if you don't know about these, please do reach out to us and we can direct you to the websites that have that information. And last thing is the direct business support. And I'll talk about that on the next slide, which actually goes through some of our core services. So what we can provide to companies at no charge is market insight. So we can share with you information that we've gleaned from the market here about how your product or service might benefit from coming to this market and where the opportunities might reside. We can normally also provide advice as to sort of where in the country might be the biggest opportunity for you. And also, moving on next, connect with key contacts. Because we have people on the ground, and a lot of our trade commissioners are actually locally engaged. They are people who have been here for years, some of them Canadian, some of them British, who understand the market, have a strong network, and are able to provide you that advice on who you need to speak to, and often also make those key introductions. We can also provide suggestions on where some new opportunities might be. We have people who are attending, whether it's a conference or certain activities, and we hear certain opportunities that are coming up, and we feed those back into the Canadian system to make sure that Canadian companies and Canadian associations are aware of those opportunities might be. And finally, we can also provide some support as far as resolving business problems. We don't get involved in legal issues, but we have managed to provide some clarity with some border concerns. We can provide advice if the lawyers are required on who has been retained in the past. Our overall objective here is to be on the ground and to provide you with better insight to help you expand to new markets and to reduce your risks. The way that I view it is that our aim is to provide you with critical business advice to help you make better business decisions. So this is overall my presentation. I would just like to simply wrap up with one last thing of this slide, which actually provides our contact information here in London. And please do reach out. This is our general TD mailbox, or our trade mailbox here at the High Commission. It gets checked every day, and your request then gets forwarded on to the Trade Commissioner, who is best suited to support you in your endeavors here in the UK. So with that, I'd like to wrap up and say thank you so much for your time. I'm very much looking forward to our Q&A session. With that, let's get the Q&A session started. Thank you so much.
All right, thanks so much, Taylor, for that great presentation. The UK is obviously a really important market, so great to get your perspective on that. So I'd like to welcome Taylor on screen with me here today, and we're going to start by discussing the poll results. So as usual, I'm going to delay for time a little bit to give people one last chance to run over to the poll and submit an answer. So I'll start reading the question out that was asked to everybody today. So what are the biggest concerns in your existing or potential trading relationship with the UK? The options there were tariffs, regulations, rules of origin, standards, VAT, customs checks, IP, labor mobility, and data regulations. Oh, and I see people are answering because things are moving. That's great. So the top two by a pretty significant margin at almost a tie is tariffs and regulations. So, and then followed, oh, VAT just jumped up to third place. So as that's going live, what would be your immediate response to those top three, Taylor?
Certainly. So maybe I'll start with tariffs, because that's probably one of the easiest ones to address. So tariff rates right now are somewhere between to the UK. That was because the benefits of CETA were rolled over into the new. People can appreciate that if you're exporting to the UK, tariff rates will remain unchanged as they were under CETA. So that's the good news. Looking that we are going to be looking at negotiating a new bespoke agreement, I can't imagine the tariff rates adjusting downward from there. So if anything, we're going to be looking at even more
things being removed as far as having tariffs. So that's good news. We have continuity in that regard. That's an interesting one. We know that the UK has been very occupied with the overall Brexit transition. And to facilitate that, they've basically taken over all the rules the EU as a starting place. And from here going forward, we're going to see slowly an evolution as to what they may or may not want to change. Doesn't mean that they're going to change it. It just means that we might start to see a little bit of divergence, as I mentioned, from the EU rules. Some things that people are going to have to pay attention to at the border, for example, there's a few dates that are coming up. There's been a grace period provided by the UK. Just for example, at the end of June, that might actually be extended, that the grace period on products of an animal origin no longer or will now require a physical inspection when it crosses the border. That's due to come into effect as of June 30th. We're hearing that might be extended. There's some other dates to look forward from October 1st where pre-notification requirements are going to kick in. January 1st, safety and security declarations will need to be required, and a few others. So these are some key things that you have to look at. But again, the UK is looking at potentially extending these because it is taking a little bit more time to put things into effect. The VAT, that was a bit of a challenge when it first came out, and hopefully I was able to provide a justice for people. It really affects those smaller companies who are exporting products directly from Canada to consumers, and not going through an electronic platform or any of that. Like the reasons we enjoy when someone sends us a package, if it's below, I think it's $20, I haven't checked, free. That's no longer the case here in the UK. So anything crossing the border, and that would mean that if you are exporting, for example, a keychain or some sort of a knitted product into a consumer here in the UK, you are going to be the one who's liable for collecting that the VAT and submitting it. So it becomes somewhat problematic if you're looking at those three being the top three. And I'm happy to take any more questions on the VAT because I know that can get complicated. And we actually do have sort of a one-page, it's more like a two-page overview that was provided us by one of the customs brokers here that we can have.
All right, excellent. No, that's great. Thanks so much, Taylor. So let's move over into the questions now. So I see questions are starting to roll in, which is great. So folks, feel free to get those questions in there as we're discussing these ones that are already here. So let's start with one that's a direct response to the presentation that you just gave. So is the issue described in the wheat example regarding rules of origin mostly pertinent to commodities and manufacturing inputs for products that would be sold from the UK to the EU, or consumer goods and products meant to be sold in the UK market? Are they also at risk?
So when we're looking at the example you provided was rules of origin as far as inputs being shipped over here into the UK, being put into a product and then moving outside the UK. So it's for, as I said, manufacturing inputs, agricultural inputs like wheat, for example, coming into a product here or coming into the UK, being processed or changed in some way or being added to another product and then being exported out of the UK. So that's the rules of origin that I'm referring to, because that's the big change. There is still a rules of origin issue exporting into the UK. For example, if you're exporting over cookies and there's a high content of input from South America, the US, other places, that would lower down the Canadian content of that from Canada to the UK. And that's when a rules of origin would impact. But that basically has remained status quo when we're looking at the comparison between CETA and the current trade continuity agreement.
Excellent, thanks. So another specific question coming in from one of our wineries here in Nova Scotia. They're working on a can export funding application, and one of the target markets is the UK. Wondering if it's possible to get in contact with your office there in London to sort of better understand what to include in the application and talk through can export more generally.
Yeah, I'd be happy to make that introduction. the officer responsible for wine is active wine promotion program here. Pre-COVID, we had a wine tasting event here at the High Commission, and we do recommend you getting in touch with Emma. And also, sorry, did they say they were from Nova Scotia?
Yes.
Because if so, the Nova Scotia Wine Association is actually quite involved in that as well.
Perfect. I also see Aline LeBlanc, your colleague here at Global Affairs in Atlantic Canada, also said that she'd be happy to have a conversation about that as well. So lots of supports available to you around CanExport. And I see the note here. I understand, folks, there's a little bit of a lag and maybe a little bit of things cutting out here and there. So apologize if there's a few glitches, but I think we're still doing okay. And if anything doesn't come through super clearly, as always, Taylor and his team in London are available, so you can always follow up directly with them as well if there's additional info you want. So, but we'll power through. We're going to see if we can get another few questions in here. So one that came in, so with all the trade frictions and readjustment caused by Brexit, is this a good time to attempt entering the UK market for the first time, or should Atlantic Canadian SMEs wait it out a little bit?
It's an excellent question. I think you should definitely look at the UK. The UK market on its own is a huge market full of opportunities. Certainly, Brexit has changed a little bit of the dynamics when we look at supply chains, specifically between the UK and the EU, which, as I mentioned, could actually create some interesting opportunities. So again, depends on what you're looking to sell, sort of has been adjusting, etc. So I do believe that the UK remains an interesting market. I do highly recommend, because of sort of the changes, the uncertainty as to where some of the regulations may proceed, I strongly recommend that, depending what sector, actually I would recommend this for everyone, is that you reach out to us and have a conversation with our trade commissioners, because we have specialists in almost every single sector who can talk a little bit more about what the nuances are for your particular sector.
Perfect. That's great. So we have a question coming in about e-commerce, and so I'll ask the question and also reference put an asterisk and say there's an e-commerce fact sheet in the resources section of the platform today. So if you want to dig in even more, but the specific question coming in from Patrick was around what are some of the most popular consumer e-commerce sites in the UK that you know about, Taylor?
So again, I think it sort of depends on what product you're looking to sell. There's a number for pet products, for example. Amazon is very, very popular here. And then there's also a number of online stores that do shopping directly to consumers. So there are a number of different platforms. I think, again, we need to have a conversation with you to see exactly what it is that you're looking to sell and what might be the most appropriate platform. The good news here, though, is that the UK consumer is very used to using electronic platforms now. There had been, I would call, a little bit of hesitancy before, but with the pandemic, everyone has got used to shopping online. It was a primary means of getting food to your home for most people. And certainly Amazon here has done exceedingly well during COVID. The other interesting thing, much easier to get your product onto an e-platform to begin with and start to generate a bit of an interest base there. That's really sort of if you're into products being foodstuffs, it's a segue to get yourself onto like the digital store shelf, having your product start to be recognized there, and then that will be moved over to the literal store shelf at a later date once you start getting some traction. So that is a very viable way of getting access to the market. And then I'll link directly through one of those platforms. The VAT for you is no longer an issue. You've managed to circumnavigate that.
Oh, that's a good piece of info to have. That's great. Thanks. So we've got got some more questions coming in. That's great. Keep those questions coming, everybody. So just like with entering so many markets around the world, working with a local partner is really key. So Taylor, do you have some advice on finding the right partner when going into the UK?
certainly networking. And if you've been on one of these sessions before, I'm hoping and assuming that my colleagues have talked about that. I spoke about that earlier today. Our team here has, and if you have a conversation with us, we can start to get a better understanding about what you're looking to sell, who your target audience is, and we can normally start to make a few recommendations on who you want to network or engage with that could potentially be a partner for you locally to either help sell your product or to make recommendations on who can actually help you do that. So it really comes down to, again, a bit of a conversation because the UK is a huge market and every sector has its little bit of a nuance, but we can certainly help to do that. I'll also link it back to the broader sort of question that comes up often these days is about, you know, the whole idea of virtual meetings and virtual discussions. Through the pandemic, it's been very, very difficult to travel, which has created opportunities as far as gaining access to speak to companies. We found that at least here in the UK, the access in to speak to people virtually has been very high, and we do not anticipate that significantly changing going forward. There's a recognition that maybe we don't need to travel quite as often as we had, and that maybe some of these meetings can be done virtually. Will not come back into vogue. They will, and they will still be incredibly important, but they'll be more about solidifying the relationship and building forward. I still am a strong believer that going forward, shape the relationship virtually to see if there's something there before you come over and meet in person. And then having the ongoing relationship, I think, will be much, much easier doing it virtually going forward. So if there is a small silver lining from the pandemic, I do think it means sort of less travel, less time away from our families, and being able to leverage the virtual tools that are now so predominant in our day-to-day lives.
That's excellent. That was a two birds with one stone answer, because one of the questions that had come in was around virtual business development. So so that's great to get that insight as well. And another question that came in here is around, so the UK is a large and mature market with sophisticated customers. Could you share a few ideas on how an Atlantic Canadian SME could break through the noise and gain a competitive edge in a market with the size and maturity of the UK?
Sorry, I don't mean to always link back, but it sometimes depends on what sector you're looking at. And the reason why the UK is made up of many different areas. You have Northern Ireland, you have Wales, you have Scotland, you have the various different regions of the UK as well. And we've seen a few companies here take a very successful approach about not targeting London and actually looking at starting off in some of the I wouldn't want to call them smaller communities because they're quite often much larger than they are in Canada, but starting off maybe in a Manchester, maybe going up and looking at Edinburgh. Also, where are the various hubs that pertain to your sector, your industry? So this would be my advice: is to look at where there's opportunities either for you to find partnerships, but also maybe where are some of the markets that you can actually go and reach into and start to sell your product here in the UK, which is maybe has a little bit less congestion because it's not London. And we also know that there's a number of cities that are very, very interested in having new investors, very interested in working with potential partners. I've met people in Manchester, Scotland, Cardiff. I've been very fortunate to have gone across the UK and met with many people. So that would be my advice: is don't necessarily just look at where you might be able to get a bit of traction, where there's a bit less noise, and then of course work with us as far as providing with where you might want to look at.
Perfect. All right, we've got time for probably a couple more questions here before we have to move into our break. So next one would be, in what sectors do you see the biggest industry shifts happening over the next few years that can increase opportunities for Canadian businesses in the UK?
So I think this sort of comes back to sort of the concern about global warming. The UK's, as far as hosting COP26 and looking at how do we move towards a cleaner amount of money into greening the economy here, looking at investing into clean tech, and how do they sort of move forward? So I would think that that is one area that would be a huge opportunity, or is going to be a huge opportunity, is to sort of how do we work with the UK to identify these opportunities to build up these sorts of opportunities. The other area that and I mentioned in my presentation as well, is to take a look at the supply chains to better understand where those opportunities might actually be for you, as some of the challenges will start to more and more rise to the surface between the UK and the EU moving products back and forth. So those are where I see some of the largest sort of opportunities. But the UK will continue to be an important market for Canada. That I have absolutely no doubt.
Excellent. So I think we got time for one more question here, and gonna go to one where maybe if we could get into a bit of a case study here. But I'm wondering if you could provide an example where the TCS has facilitated business entry or access in the UK recently in the post-Brexit environment.
Sure. I guess I'll start with sort of some general comments, and then I'll move into more sort of a specific example. Is, leading up to Brexit was a very complicated process. There was a lot of sort of uncertainty, and quite honestly, there actually be a deal in the end between the UK and the EU, and therefore we provided a lot of very solid advice to Canadian companies as to what they need to watch for, what they need to be concerned with. Do they need to stockpile? Sure that they have to worry about some certifications. We provided a lot of that information. In the end, the number of questions that came in actually after January 1st were much less than we were anticipating. And I think because there was an agreement, but also because we managed to get a lot of information up online for Canadians to absorb and to understand what the impact were. There's a couple quick examples that I would have, though. There was a challenge around some of the tariff lines that went up that were not actually to us by a Canadian company. We went in immediately to the UK government and got that sorted out to make sure that our Canadian companies were charged the most appropriate tariff. And there was, I won't say what product it was, but there was an agricultural product officials. They were dealing with a lot of change. So I'm not sure how to address a container of Canadian products coming in. That unfortunately sometime, I think in the end it was about a week, as we worked with and the UK importer and the customs officials to get it all through the system. In the end, it was very unfortunate, but the role that we played was actually very important to make sure that even though that there was, like I said, a very unfortunate delay. So preemptive troubleshooting and sharing information, but also looking at where were the issues that popped up. And I have to say, it was a little bit complicated and confusing from January 1st as they left the EU.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Taylor, for the presentation and for sticking around to answer the questions from our audience. It was great to have you with us here today. I really appreciated having you join me. Enjoyed hearing your presentation as well. So thanks so much for your time, and looking forward to speaking with you again soon. So thanks so much.